Today, we will repeat a discussion on the research design and the research methodology, but we'll delve more into the common research methodologies that you may have interacted with. And as we do so, my request and my appeal to you is look at your own research methodology as to which one is the preferred one that you are using in your own study, so that at least you can relate this to your own proposal. We will look at experimental, quasi-experimental, and ex post facto research design. These are the typical different methodologies that are there in research. They are more that are coming up now, but we'll just navigate through all of them, although they will be quite hectic, I know. We will have a discussion on the quantitative research design and a qualitative research design, and we'll try to see if we can compare both approaches in our discussion today. So this really is the menu that we are laying out today for all of us.
Research methodology, research method, research design, and then the approach. Can in your discussion, can you touch on those things, please? Thank you.
What is your understanding of a research design, Edward? Let's deal with design.
According to me, it's a research method. The way I'm going to approach my research, like quantitative and qualitative. That's a research design.
Yeah, what is a research design? In other words, if somebody comes to you and say, in simple terms, what is a research design? What would you say? Because once you complicate it, then it becomes too complicated. What is your simple understanding of a research design? Let's talk design first.
It's the method of research.
Okay. Then what is the research method? If research design is the method, are you going to then say method is the design?
Not research design is the approach to the research.
Okay.
Yes.
Research design is the approach.
Yes, to research.
Okay. And then what then is the research approach? If somebody says which research approach or which research design approach have you adopted? What is your understanding? What would be your understanding?
My research design will be quantitative or qualitative or mixed method or mixed. That will be type of my research design.
Okay. Prudence, I see you want to rescue us. Go ahead. Research design, research method, research methodology, approach, and stuff. Would you wanna?
I think I'm not rescuing. I'm just want to answer as well. My understanding when you're saying design planning, it's like for me, I was thinking more of your layout, how you are going to approach whatever that you are researching. It's more like your layout, to put it in like simple terms. That's my understanding.
Okay.
Yes.
That is the design, right?
Yes. Yes.
Now that's fine. We can live with that. Yes. What then is the research? What then is the method?
It's the how. How you going to?
How are you going to put that layout together?
Layout, yes.
Okay.
Then you had your quantitative and your qualitative methods, depending on maybe your research topic, or should I say your research methodology. You either use one of each, or you use both? I don't know. I'm just assuming.
You can use both. You're on the right. Look, I don't want you to feel guilty about trying to really deal with this. You need to be a little bit more confident about what we are discussing, because
Yes.
you are on the right track, and I think you're actually getting the principles correct.
Yes.
So we need to discuss this, so that I think what Edward is starting for me is very crucial.
Yes.
Because it says, can we differentiate a design, a methodology,
yes.
a method, and an approach? So
Yes.
I think let's talk about that. And yes, I think you are actually rescuing all of us. If you can just repeat what you said on the design, you say is the layout.
Yes.
And the methodology, you said, is the how.
How you going to do it?
How you're going to put that design together. I mean, the layout together.
Yes.
And the is it the approach? You're saying which approach are you going to use or to employ?
Yes.
To do your investigation.
Yes.
So if that then was to be the case, what would you say about quantitative and qualitative approaches? Would you say those are the methods, or where would you place them?
I would place them it's your gosh. It's your methods.
Okay.
It's your methods. It's hence I said it's either you use one of each or you use both, depending on, I would say, your topic or what you're researching.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's first agree. We all agree, Edward. We all agree that the research design is a plan. You agree? Are you fine with that?
Yes. Yes. You are fine.
Okay.
Yes.
So nobody at least will go back and say, what is a research design? We say that's just a plan. So you've got the whole plan. Which remember we said is a plan on how is about the procedure, standard procedures, how you're going to structure your procedures. It's about how you're going to collect your data, and it's about how you're going to analyze data. Can we agree at least on that? For research design, that is about a plan on how you're going to structure your study or your investigation, but also a plan on how you're going to collect data and also how you're going to analyze data. Remember, research is about collection and analysis of data. So can we, at least on that front, agree?
Yes, sir.
That's what you are fine there, right? We together.
Yes, I'm fine.
Okay. Let Sam then take us through the methodology then. Now we've got the design, we've got the layout. Now we know this is the plan. This is how we are going to approach the whole thing. What then is the methodology?
So I would go with the methodology would be what you are, what method are you going to use? Are you going to use qualitative? Are you going to use quantitative research? Or are you going to use mixed?
No, let's take a step back a bit.
Okay.
If you've got the plan, which is your plan to collect and to analyze data, you are going to need tools or techniques, right?
Mm-hmm.
To collect and to analyze that data, because on its own, the design doesn't collect and analyze data. I have a plan, but now you need the techniques to put that layout together. That's the methodology.
Oh.
Isn't it? Isn't it now that you've got the plan, you need to have a tool or a technique that you are going to use? And here, when I talk tools and techniques, what are you thinking about for collection of data? You're already thinking interviews, you're already thinking questionnaires, isn't it? Those are techniques, aren't they?
Yes.
Agreed.
I agree.
So we are then saying, okay, if that then is the methodology, is the way, because you need that data for you to be able to analyze and make sense of the problem or that you're investigating. So let's then just pause and say, if methodology then is the technique, then what then becomes a method, like your those approaches. So in other words, you can go and get more, from data, or you can go and get less from data using the techniques. So the method, the research method that we are talking about now becomes your approaches. So which approach are we talking about? You can go and get more using the quantitative or less using the qualitative.
Okay. But would that... Okay.
Yes.
So would that not be like the method? Would that not be like, for instance, a desktop method or?
Yes, those are the methods that we're looking at, the methods that you're going to, like you can say methods or approaches. So now here we are talking semantics. An approach could be, what is going to be your approach of collecting data? Now you say, my approach is going to be that I need more people. When you start talking more people, then that approach of more, we can quantify it as what? As quantitative approach.
Yes.
Now, remember, desktop research is a type of research that you are conducting, and it will fall either in one of the approaches or both. So it can fall under as quantitative or qualitative approach. But you will, in both instances, you will still have the planning and the tools that you are going to need to collect and analyze data. What becomes important for the two concepts is that there is one that puts the layout, as we said, is the research design, and there's another one that then gives you tools that you need to collect data. So the difference is that the tools and the design will talk to which approach you are following, because you will agree that there will be tools that are quantitative made, and there are those tools that are qualitative in nature, isn't it?
Correct.
But those tools are meant as techniques to collect data. So whether you're going to collect data through interviews or questionnaires, so it doesn't really matter, but it's about techniques that you will use to collect data. Now, because they apply to both approaches, we're saying take note that each research will have a research design and a research methodology. The reason being, any research that you're going to conduct will have a plan and will also have a technique or techniques for collection and analysis of data. So it is applicable to both scenarios. Edward, I hope you're still following.
Yes. Now I'm following you through it.
So you will not undertake research or an investigation without data, and you won't undertake any study without analyzing the data. So the collection and the analysis is the methodology. Ritumates, I see your I see your hand is up. Jump in.
Yes, Prof. I'm just getting confused because then I'm thinking, to me, it sounds like, and I might be very wrong, that you are explaining methodology as methods. So now my question is, what if tools and techniques are methodology, then what is methods?
The methods, then we are looking at the two types of research design methods, which is like I'm saying, these are semantics now. All what we're trying to do is to try to guide your understanding so that when we get to the two different approaches, actually there's more than two, it's three, if you like, if you consider mixed methods, right? So what we are doing first is then to say there's a methodology. So in other words, what methodology are you going to, in other words, what techniques are you going to use to collect data? There's an overlap between methodology and method. Maybe we should argue that. Basically here what we are trying to say is, if you start saying questionnaire is going to be your instrument or your technique of collection of data, right? What are we talking about there? Ritumates. Once I say questionnaires are going to be the way in which I'm going to collect data, what are we talking about? What are you hearing?
I'm hearing you talking about a technique or the tools.
Yes, but in terms of the approach, in terms of the research, you see when you talk,
you are talking quantitative.
I'm talking qualitative, yes.
Yes.
Quantitative,
okay.
Quan is a quantitative, right?
Quantitative, yes.
Because
Quantitative.
you're hearing a technique. You basically hearing me saying the instrument that I'm talking about fall more in the numbers, the numbers than the qualitative. So when we talk about research design methods, now when we go to methods, we say which research design method are you going to use? Now there is the type. And I'm saying the semantics must not confuse you, because what you find in the methodology and the method is that if there's a questionnaire, it's qualitative. Well, and I'm being very loose about saying that, because I don't want it to be more like, quantitative equals questionnaire. I'm just making a relationship between the instruments, because you find certain instruments more on certain research designs. So in a research design method, you will find quantitative and qualitative. What was the question earlier on by Edward was, if we could separate the understanding of research design as planning. So there is an element in the same planning where you include research design method, which is your qualitative, quantitative. There's an extra one, which is mixed methods. We're not going to be talking about it today, but obviously when you understand the two methods, research methods, you will then be able to mix that, and already you've got a mixed method. So I hope if let's hold that thought if you are not clear still, Ritumetse, for now. But what I want you to understand.
Can I say? Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I say I'm just testing the clarity that I have, and I'm just trying to put it in another way. Okay. Would I be correct then to say the methods will always lead you to your methodology? That is a bulk of your tools that and techniques that you are going to use is actually what is going to inform the kind of method, the kind of approach that you are going to do, whether qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method. And that simply answers what your methodology is. It all simply informs what your methodology is.
You can put it that way, because you can put it that way in terms of saying, when I look, it's almost like knowing that a certain technique applies to a certain method of research. So for you to be absolutely correct, you need to know how they relate to each other. So in other words, if somebody comes to you and say, I've conducted a qualitative research. Remember earlier on we spoke about the different types not earlier. There are different types of qualitative research as there will be types of quantitative research. So because of that, when somebody says I've done qualitative research, you will then be looking at research methods that is qualitative in nature. Therefore, your methodology is going to influence how you look at that research itself. If this is getting too complicated, let's put a pause on it. When we get to qualitative, I think we'll be talking about it more and more. But it's important that we all go back now and read about methods, research methods, scholarly, research methodology, and research design. So you look at your own proposal and say, what is my research design? In other words, what is my overall plan? In the research design, you will have a method or methods that you include in the proposal. Because you will either say, I'm going to have a quality. I know it's easier to jump into the qualitative and quantitative even before you clarify the design, the methodology, and the method. So when we say research design method, we're mainly going to be talking more on the approaches. which is your qualitative and your quantitative. So when we get there, please interrupt us as much as you want, because this is the opportunity for us to be very clear on what we are talking about. But I think I still have, was somebody's hand up? Ritumes, if we have not clarified you sufficiently, that's fine. I think as we go along, engage us. We may not answer it convincingly, but what we are trying to do is that we are trying to demonstrate that there is a difference between a design, a methodology, and a method. So in case you are not answering the questions correctly, all we are saying is that at least those three elements differ. But when you look at them, you're going to find techniques and you're going to find approaches, whether qualitative, quantitative. So in the chapter that deals with research design, we expect to see those kind of things. At least we can agree on what are those elements that we can expect to see in one of them. Edward, you triggered this. I don't know where you stand now on it. Have we messed it up for you?
No, sir. Thanks very much. Now I've got an idea now. Thanks very much. We can proceed. Thank you.
I know you started it, but now maybe we have given it a different kind of shape. Now, let's just repeat. Research methodologies, the techniques used to collect and analyze data. Remember, Ritumes, you don't use quantitative or qualitative techniques to collect data. You use techniques such as your interviews and so on, your questionnaires to collect and analyze data. I hope in saying that, you are then able to see what an understanding of a methodology will be. If the methodology is then seen as the techniques that is used to collect and analyze data, then a qualitative and quantitative becomes more than a research methodology in that context. So there are different areas that we can, and what we are going to try to do in the next few minutes is to really go through those different types. Some of them will be quantitative in nature, others will be qualitative in nature. You probably have heard about this term called action research. Now, I've decided to put it here because I think we do it most of the time, but you don't realize. Because action research is a type of applied research that focuses on finding a solution to a local problem in a local setting. People at work from time to time, do action research, and they don't realize that they're actually providing solution to local problem in their local setting. How many of you do action research regularly as a nature of as the type of work that you do every day? And what kind of action or applied research can you relate to? Action research is what we do regularly. And I thought let's start with that so that we all do understand what action research is. I'm sure most of you are doing it all the time, but you just don't realize it. So action research design is important because it's an educational research that involves collecting information regarding the current educational program. For example, if you are within the education space and you analyze the information, you develop a plan to improve on on whatever situation that you're dealing with in your workspace. So my question is, how many of you do get involved in action research within your work environment? Maybe you do it and you don't realize that you're actually doing it. But let's just talk about it a little bit as another research type. Anyone who wants to talk about action research? We say it's a research where it's a local problem. You come up with a local solution. It happens all the time. It actually happens regularly, just that you don't realize because it's not documented and so forth. Action research. Anyone who wants to talk about action research that they do regularly or periodically in the space that they are in? Because remember, action research assumes that the world that we live in is constantly changing. So because it's changing, like your work environment is constantly changing, you as a researcher, you're part of the agent that brings about understanding of the changing world in your own environment. So I just want to find out from you whether you do realize that sometimes you do action research or you don't, and what is your understanding. This is going to be very important because at times we don't need to do complicated research as researchers. You can simply just put together an action research that is based on the local problem where you find a local solution.
Yes, Prof, as you have said, sometimes we are doing it, but we are not aware. Like I'm working in the Correlational Service Department, where you find that the prisoners are escaping from the prison. It's not the research. We will come up with but how can we stop these people from escaping from the prison? It's not a research, but it's a strategy. It's like when we want a solution. It's like a project where we want a solution to stop them. So my understanding is that I think that is part of our research because it's a project aimed at limiting or stopping those prisoners from escaping from the prison.
It is action research because, sorry, I'm interjecting because I just want to check if I'm correct here. It is applied, so it's actually applied research in order to improve specific practices, right? So in other words, you are going to use those results to improve on certain practices. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So basically, it's action research. So it's research that is going to bring about action where you are going to change certain policies, practices, procedures, and so forth because you are informed by something.
Yes.
So we are doing it, and we are just not writing it down as it is required in terms of the empirical way of doing things. So that is a classic case in point, Edward, that you are mentioning. I think it's a valid point that you are saying. Let me check. Is there anything else that you want to say on that, Edward? But I'm just affirming that which you are saying it's a typical action research because the action eventually will lead to some specific practices improving going forward. So it's action research.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to use a different maybe example.
Okay.
Action research. Say I'm a runner and I'm busy training for, say, comrades. And the more I train, I use different, say, there's energy boosters that we use along the way. Okay. And you tend to find which one works for you and which one doesn't work for you. So you obviously apply it during training and you see which one would be perfect for you during the actual race day. Would you say that would be an action research in a process? When we are training, then you consume those energy supplements, and during the race day, then you'll know which one works for you best and which one doesn't. Could that be a good example of?
It's a slightly different because remember now, we're saying action research is a type of applied research that focuses on finding a solution to a local problem. Now, what is the problem? Is it performance enhancement, or what is the problem that you are trying to solve in that? I don't think it neatly fits as action research, but I hear where you are going with it. I hear where you are going with it. Action research is where, of course, you want to improve your performance. So you look at the performance as a problem.
Yes.
And then you say, I want to bring a solution. In other words, I want to improve my performance, if that is the argument or the hypothesis. So you then start experimenting with different products
Yes.
You know, there could be an argument, but I think I hear where you are going with it.
Yeah.
So the problem, then finding a solution to a local problem. So basically, here we say you are in that space. You are already working in an organization. So there is challenges regarding, let's say, profitability. And somebody says, you know what, we are losing profit because of the following issues, or identified, diagnosing the problem. And they then come up with a solution. When they do so, what are they doing? They bring a solution that is based on the action, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's profitability of the company. That's action research.
Okay, I get
so
it.
you're doing it at in actual fact, it's one of the beautiful thing that you can do in business, because it's I mean, because of its high level of practical relevance. So when you are a manager, you realize that there is a problem, late coming, for example, or early leaving, and you come up with a solution to that problem. It's action. You're putting action. It happens, you know, quite a lot maybe in a business environment as well, because you plan, you act, you observe, and then you reflect. So basically, it's quick. You just plan, you act on your plan, you then observe what is the behavior afterwards, and then you start reflecting. So it's quite quick.
Okay, thank you, sir.
But that's action research. I thought let's start with the simpler one, so that when we get into other complications, then we're not lost. There's another research design called experimental research design. Now, the word experiment already explain, you know, is self-explanatory. Experimental research design is a study in which participants are randomly assigned to groups, and they undergo various researcher-imposed treatments. So I put you into a class, and I train you, from the company. So I identify, I take you through training, and others do not go to training. So it's like true experiment, which involves some form of intervention. So we select a group of employees, we take them for training, and others don't go for training. That's experimental research design. Here, a researcher can most convincingly identify cause and effect relationship by using an experimental design. You just want to check, others go for training, and the others don't go for training. In such a design, you consider many possible factors that might influence a particular phenomenon. Perhaps you are sending some people for training for a purpose of improving on productivity. I mean, it's an example. And you leave others not to go for any kind of training. So an independent variable is one that the researcher studies as having a possible effect on one or more other variables. So what the training is something that is an intervention. Now, a dependent variable is a variable that is potentially influenced by an independent variable. You want to observe, using this one, you want to observe what the training is going to do to the dependent variable. In other words, if profitability is a problem, you subject people to training, you want to see whether, as a result of that intervention, there's an improvement in the productivity of the company. So in an experimental design, internal validity is essential. Internal validity meaning if you take us to training and you don't take others for training, and when we come back, there's productivity, you can easily relate the fact that there is the productivity is as a result of you having subjected some of your employees to training. So in other words, if when we come back, we are able to produce more than we were before we trained, you are more likely then to suggest, to attribute the changes in the dependent variable to the independent variable, and that will be the manipulation or the training that other people have undertaken. So there are two types of experiment. It's a lab experiment and a field experiment. A lab experiment, as the name suggests, takes place in a lab in a contrived setting, whereas a field experiment occurs in a real life setting. So when you take people into training, you're not necessarily putting them in a lab as in the natural science setup, but you're taking them for a field experiment by taking them for training in a real life situation. So with experiment research design, the units of analysis are exposed to something to which they would not have been subjected otherwise. So I take you as a group, like now, you are receiving intervention as UNISA students. We can compare you with other students that are not receiving intervention from other centers of UNISA. So it means the researcher must be able to manipulate the independent variable. So the facilitation that we are getting here is an intervention. Now we can then say, let's compare those who receive facilitation as opposed to those that do not receive facilitation. If the intention was to establish whether or not as a result of you receiving facilitation, you will perform better, we then can use the result, the end of year results, to determine, whether or not the independent variable was helpful or not. So in a classic experimental design, the researcher creates two groups, and this division into two groups forms the basis of experimental manipulation. So in other words, we put the Johannesburg group into facilitation, and we put the Pretoria group into no facilitation. So when we come to the end and we sort of assess performance, and the Johannesburg group has not performed as well as the Pretoria group, we're going to look at whether or not this facilitation works, and the reason why it could not work, it might not necessarily be, well, no, the facilitation doesn't work. It could be that there are a number of, remember, there could be a number of internal validity threats. But if we have eliminated all those, then we can simply say, you know what, the facilitation doesn't work. So I hope you do understand the experimental research design. So lab experiments seldom involve only the observation of an experimental group to which a stimulus has been administered. So in addition, researchers also observe a control group which does not receive the experimental stimulus. So what we do here, your experimental stimulus is the facilitation, and the other group in another institution, in another center of UNISA, do not receive any stimulus. So basically, we compare the two. But before we do that, we need to do pre-testing and post-testing. What do we mean? In the simplest experimental design, we have to measure all of you before you go through the participation into or getting the stimulus. So we'll take all of you together and we pre-test you. It's important to do that so that when we do post-testing, we are then able to compare the results of the pre-test to the results of the post-test. So pre-measurement, really, here we look at the dependent variable is measured before the manipulation. So we all get together, we measure all of you's knowledge of the subject, for example, your attitude, your perception. All of you will then have your score. So it's almost like your after. And we do this by means, after manipulation, we do that by means of post-test. So what do? We test you and we realize the results. All of you are going to have your own scores, and we can generate or aggregate the scores before. Then we separate the two groups, one being the treatment group, you go one side, and the other one being the control group. We observe both groups. So we come to the treatment group or the experimental group, we facilitate them. As we facilitate them, we then look at the other group that doesn't receive any facilitation. Remember, we have tested you before, we have measured you before. So post-measurement after intervention must be in place to be 100% certain that intervention is responsible for the observed changes. So when we then look at the control group and the treatment group and we compare the results, we'll then be able to say that the intervention is responsible for the changes that you are seeing. So if you do well at the end of the academic year that you are on the subject, and the other group does not do well, we are more likely to then say it is because the intervention or the stimulus that you received did work. So when you then do an evaluation of the performance of the facilitator, those are the considerations that you may want to look at. Unlike situation where you measure, but you don't know what was the pre-measurement and what is the post-measurement and what are you measuring. So internal validity becomes very important so that you measure exactly what you said you're going to measure at the beginning, during the experiment, post-experiment. So we know that you have actually identified what is to be measured. You measured it before, you measured it during, and you measured it after the experiment. Are there questions so far in terms of the experiment? We said you can do it in the lab, but you can also do it as part of field experiment. Any comment, any confusion thus far, or any reflection that, on the experimental research design and action research? Okay. Silence scares us in the virtual space. So a little bit of a reflection tells us where we all are. And I know that we probably processing the information, but let's not process it quietly. Mashudu, what do you have to say? Evening, Mashudu. Okay. Mpumzeni. Wow. Okay, Ritumes, where are you in terms of this so far? I think you are probably hearing us.
I'm sorry, Prof. I just got disturbed a few minutes, so I didn't really catch up. So, yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to catch up now.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. Sam, are you comfortable so far? What do you have to say?
So experimental research design, sure. Yeah, sure. I'm really processing here, Prof. I'm trying to make sense of it all. But I do get that the two different types of the experimental designs, which is the lab and the field experiment.
Okay.
So that I do understand quite clearly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a lot to process.
Great. Remember the lab and the field. We do a lot of field, especially in social science. Because field just means in your natural setting or a real setting. You know, when you talk to people in a work environment or at home and stuff, that's more like the context of field. So you don't remove them from their natural environment and put them in an observed space. You know, you observe them. If it's two groups at work, one group you take them for training in how to do customer care, for example, and the other group doesn't go. That group that doesn't go becomes your control group, and those that come back, they come back and they realize, well, those that got back from training are a lot more smarter than them. So you compare the performance of the two groups, that's just in a simpler way what we are trying to explain here, and I hope it's sinking in. So the intervention is the training that they are receiving. So those that don't receive training, you observe their performance, and so you test them all together before. You measure all of them before. So you do a pre-test, and you know that on average, this is the number of calls that they're all making. So you select them. Remember the equivalent groups. You can have two groups, one being the treatment group. In other words, you send in 10, you leave in 10 behind. So those 10 that go for some kind of an intervention, which is the stimulus that you are giving them, they come back and all of a sudden, they are actually giving more calls than they were before. Then you can test, post-test now. Then you pick up that you're getting more calls after the intervention from those that received some stimulus. What are you going to say? You are generally going to see a relationship between the training that they have undergone and their performance. Assuming that was what was the internal validity. That's what you wanted to achieve at the time. So we do this every day. Some people are managers. They always send people for training and they come back and they want to see the impact of training. I'm using training as a simpler example so that at least we can relate to that discussion. There are also web-based experiments. This is now the new ways in which people work, especially in the fourth industrial revolution that we hear is upon us. So increasingly, researchers are using the internet as a vehicle for conducting social science experiments. Because representative samples are not essential in most experiments, researchers can often use volunteers who respond to invitations online. Now, when you use an internet, you are not looking for a representative sample. You may not want to generalize the results. So there are people that you can invite and they join and you do a survey with them, quite quickly. So for example, one site that you might visit to get a better idea of this form of experimentation is called Online Social Psychology Studies. So if you go there, they want to know, as a result of the issues of COVID, what do we think? So people just join in and so it's a new way of doing research. So it's web-based experiment. They are also, so those are experimental research design, but there are also non-experimental research designs that we need to take note of. Generally, accept that conclusions about causal relationship made with greater confidence, e.g., astronomy and stairs that we cannot manipulate. So there are those things that are not experimental; they are non-experimental. In other words, you can't put them in an experimental research design. For example, quasi-experiment. This one is a study that has certain characteristics of experimental design, but does not fulfill the internal validity requirement. So it's quasi, meaning it's not real experiment. So it's a method similar to experimental research, but without random assignment to groups. So in quasi, what you don't do is that you don't assign randomly participants to groups. And then there is a design-based research. This one is a multi-step iterative study in which certain instructional strategies or technologies are implemented, they're evaluated and modified to determine possible factors influencing learning or performance. It's also design-based. So again, here we're looking at those strategies or those technologies, most possibly like we do with the web-based experiment. Cross-sectional design is associated primarily with social surveys, but it includes many other research methods, such as your structured observation, content analysis, official stats, and diaries. So in a cross-sectional study, people from several different age groups are sampled and compared. The next time you pick up a research report, especially surveys, ladies and gentlemen, please just go through that and see, for yourself, what method did they say they followed and why did they follow that method? So when you look at it, say, what was the problem? What was the method? And what was the finding? And what is the conclusion? You'll then realize that You know, all these concepts apply in the reports. Because if you say I've used cross-sectional design, basically you are saying my survey has included the research methods such as, you know, I did observation, I use statistics, diary. So it could be a combination of all those methods. So in a cross-sectional study, people from several different age groups are sampled. So when you do cross-sectional, you can get the young, the old, the elderly, the adult, and so on, male and female, transgender. So you do cross-sectional, as the name suggests. It's cross-sectional. That is the type of a part of the non-experimental research design. Why am I? I'm frozen here.
Prof, can I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
Can you go back to the quasi-experiment? Can you give us an experiment? You know, as you're talking, I'm trying to have experiments in my head, but I'm struggling with a quasi experiment. Like you're saying, it's a study that has certain characteristics of experimental design, but does not have, I can't see that, there's a block that's closed there.
Oh, is it? You can't,
Yeah,
is it not visible?
No, I can see now.
It does not fulfill the internal validity requirement.
Yes.
So in other words, if remember with a pure experimental design,
yes,
the first thing that we must achieve and achieve beyond doubt is internal validity.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. So with a quasi experiment, it does not necessarily fulfill that. So that's the first thing. So it might be that fire causes smoke, but other things as well. So we can conclude, but it's not, you know, I don't know why I'm using the fire smoke scenario. But the internal validity is it's not necessarily fulfilled. And the assignment, the way in which you select your group may not necessarily be random. So a quasi experiment has got those elements, but it does not. So it basically just it's experimental. That is not in its purest form experimental, but it's quasi. So if I come, because it has got certain character, I separated two groups, control group and treatment group, for example. Yes. And I send 10 people for training. I leave 3 people. Yeah. First of all, there is not equivalent. You agree? It's not the same numbers.
It's not the same numbers, yes.
Yeah. Now, when I send them to training, whilst I'm training them on how to improve profitability, I may add 1 or 2 things and they come back. I may not necessarily do pre-post testing measurements.
Okay.
But at least I can relate to you to say I had 2 groups of people, unequivalent. I mean, they were not equal. And I sent the other group for training. They came back. They might have, others might have dropped out somewhere. And then they come back and all of a sudden I see some productivity. I may or I may not necessarily relate productivity to the fact that there was an intervention. Because remember, with a pure experiment, you have got no doubt. With pure experiment, you have got 100% certainty that the results of the changes in the dependent variable are nothing else but as a result of the independent variable when you manipulate it. I hope you are able to see that.
No, I am. Thank you.
So with a quasi experiment, there might be elements that are doubtful. Let me just put it that way. That yes, I can see that, but I'm not 100. So if it was medication, if it was in a medical space, you would not necessarily administer it to humans because it still has some doubts with it.
Okay.
So in an experiment, you don't have a doubt. So if I say to you, I'm administering Panado or Comprel or Disprin for a headache, I have got no doubt that there is a relationship between that which I'm administering, which is Panado, to the ailment, which is headache.
Okay, no,
But with a quasi, I may, but I'm not. I mean, there's an issue around internal validity there.
yes.
I
No,
hope
it makes
you.
sense.
It does
No,
make sense.
Yeah, it makes sense now. Thank you.
Okay, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. All what it means is, if you are going to do a study where you are not going to have 100% experimental group design,
Yes.
then you can go for a quasi experiment where you've got the elements of the experimental, and then you don't have to select them randomly. But once you start worrying about internal validity and you're going to randomly assign your groups, then you are probably moving into experimental group design. There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
For example, you've got 20 people in a work environment and you call all of them and you want to select 10. You randomly take 10, they're doing the same thing, they're similar in many, and you select the first 10. When you select the first 10 randomly and you have assigned them to group 1 and you call them treatment group, and you assign the other group to say you are the control group, you have actually selected them randomly. And if then you're saying that the intention is that I'm going to put you through some kind of a rigorous intervention with a specific outcome, then you test all of them at the same time, and by the time they come back, that's the pre-testing. By the time they come back, the two groups, and you allow them to do what needs to be done, and you post-test them, and the results are available, you are able to see and compare the results of the control group and the experimental group and say the intervention did not work.
Okay.
Because as a result of the intervention, they came back and they are worse than they were before they went for intervention. So basically, you can then disqualify the value of whatever else that was to be improved on, because there's no improvement as a result of intervention. So quasi is really, as the name suggests, it's more like light.
Yeah.
Let's look at correlation. You always hear people say there's a correlation relationship. The relationship is correlational. What do they mean when they say the relationship is correlation? There's a correlation between this and that. What is your understanding of that? If I'm saying is there a correlation between you attending classes and learning, or your performance and what have you? What do you understand about the correlational relationship? Remember, now we are qualifying relationship. There's a causal relationship. Now here we are talking about the correlational relationship. What is your understanding of that? What is your understanding of a correlational research? You've got variables that you want to check if there's a correlational relationship between them. You've probably spoken to some friend before and say, but is there a correlational relationship between this and that? What are you trying to suggest?
Could it be that you are saying if this happens, this is what is going to happen, this is what is supposed to happen, or let me put it this way. If you attend classes, then you will pass. So there is a correlational relationship between attending classes and getting good marks. So the more you attend classes, the more the likelihood that you will pass. And the less you attend, the more the likelihood that you will not pass.
Oh yeah. That sounds very, I think that sounds very close to what it is. I mean, you are using it as an example, I think, just to simplify the situation. But I saw there were some hands also. I think you've made it more simpler, but I'm sure there are others who wants to add to a correlational relationship. You said there's a correlational relationship between attending class and Mudikwe. I think your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. So with correlation, it could either be negative or positive. So it could be that the other one it increases the other one can decrease, or it could, if it increases, then the other one will also increase. The independent and dependent variable in that regard.
Okay, give us an example.
An example, perhaps maybe stopping smoking and performing better in running.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So you say there's a correlational relationship between quitting smoking and improving performance as an athlete.
Yes.
So the correlational relationship is what? You said it can be positive or negative.
Yes. So that one would be negative.
And I thought it would be a positive.
If you're quitting smoking and then there is increased performance, yeah, that would be positive. Huh? Is that positive?
I thought it sounds like it might be positive in that your performance improves. It will be negative when the correlation will be negative if you start smoking and you're an athlete.
I'm trying to get to the inverse and the inverse part of it. So if you smoke more, then your running becomes less and less better, if I may put it that way.
Yeah.
Then isn't that a negative relationship then?
It is a negative relationship.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
But then if you stop smoking, you're saying your running might just improve.
Okay, so that would be a positive.
Smoking. So smoking.
Okay, let me give another example, Prof.
Oh, okay.
So the correlation of smoking cigarettes the more you drink, the more you're most likely to smoke cigarettes.
Okay. So there's a correlational relationship between smoking and drinking.
Yeah, and wouldn't that be positive? Because I'm looking at in an inverse proportion of what the effect is. That's why I say the other one is negative and the other one is positive.
Yes, but what I want to, I agree with you. But what I want to hear is, are you saying there's a correlational relationship between drinking and smoking?
Yes, there is a correlation.
So in other words, there is some kind of a relationship, and in the relationship, the nature of it is correlational.
Yes.
Okay, because that's what we want to establish here. There are variables. So what we are trying to do is that we are trying to establish the relationship between variables without us controlling one. We're not manipulating anything. We are not controlling anything. We're just saying there is. So if you were to observe drinking and smoking, right? And drinking, I mean drinking alcohol, and smoking, I mean smoking tobacco or cigarette, right? You're saying it is very likely the probability that those who smoke or those who drink can smoke or do smoke is very high.
Yes.
So there's a correlational relationship between drinking and smoking.
Yes.
So those variables do have a relationship, but the kind of relationship that we are saying at the moment, you say is correlational. It could be negative, it could be positive, but at least that's what correlation does. A correlation reflects the strength or a direction of the relationship between two or more variables. So the direction could be positive or could be negative.
Yeah, I think I was jumping the gun, Prof, and already trying to establish if it's positive or negative.
No, you are not. I think you're just reminding us that we need to be aware that the relationship can either be positive or negative, but it's correlational.
Yes.
So at home, when you come home and you come early hours of the morning, and there's a child, there's a correlation because there might be conflict there.
Excuse me, can you repeat that?
Is there a correlational relationship between going clapping and coming back at night and conflict at home? You see, the correlation is just to say what is the nature of the relationship? It's correlational. Correlational
when one
research,
thing happens.
sorry?
So it will be that when one thing happens, then the other one is most likely to be affected and
Yes.
change its nature.
Yes. And you're not manipulating anything, or you're not controlling. It's just the way they relate to each other. I mean, you always say to people, if you do this, it will lead to, so basically,
Yeah.
it's almost like it's escalating to another type of a problem. So there is some correlation between X and the Y.
Yes.
So a correlational study examines the extent to which differences in one characteristics or one variable are associated with a difference in one or more other characteristics. So you look at one and the other, and you basically just examine them. So a correlation exists if or when one variable increases, another variable either increases or decreases somewhat predictable fashion. I mean, we spoke about drinking and smoking. So either you start smoking, you might as well start drinking, or you can start drinking and you might as well experiment with. So one variable may increase and another variable or increase or decrease. So the relationship is correct. So it affects the other. Knowing the value of one variable then enables us to predict the value of the other variable with some degree of accuracy, isn't it? That's what we are saying. That if we know one variable, if we know smoking or drinking, we are more likely to predict the value of the other variable with some degree of accuracy. That we parents always say that, if you start going out with bad friends, then you are more to become bad. What are they doing? They are trying to explain the variable peer pressure, for example, right? Because they're simply, we know these are bad people. I mean, bad. But what we are trying to say there is that if you then go with bad people, there is some degree of accuracy that we are on the variable that they will influence you to become bad. That's correlational research in a simplified way, as accurate as you want it to be. But I hope you get the drift. Longitudinal research study. This one is used to map change and contextualize the mechanisms, processes through which changes in organizations. There are two types of longitudinal research: panel study and the cohort study. Sometimes I hear people doing is that they study today, they come back 10 years later to study the organization and so forth. So those are longitudinal studies. They do take time. For example, data is collected on more occasions. In the cohort study, you select either an entire cohort of people in the company or in an organization, or randomly select a sample of them as the focus of the question. The cohort is made up of people who share certain characteristics, such as all those who are born the same week. So you study a group of people or a cohort today, you come back and you start 1994, when South Africa got freedom, maybe 10 years later, you study them again. Those are the cohort type of longitudinal study that you can do. In a longitudinal study, a single group of people is followed over the course of several months or years, and data related to the characteristics under investigation are collected at various times. You've heard people saying the people who were born in this period, then they come back, they study them again just to see whether or not, their progression over time. That's a longitudinal study. What is a case study? Case study design involves a detailed, intensive analysis of one or more cases, which the researcher aims to study in depth. So you study a particular case. It could be that you're interested in studying the Enyobeni Tavern tragedy, so you want to go and understand the and really put in a shift around research there. Case research is concerned with the complexity and particular nature of the case. So you've got the case that you're following and you're following in details. So it is a type of qualitative research in which an in-depth data are gathered relative to a single program, or even for the purpose of learning more about an unknown or poorly understood situation. So you focus on that case, you spend time on it, and you sort of bring an understanding to the general scientific community on that case. So a case study, a particular individual or a program or event is studied in depth for a defined period of time. The data that you are going to collect often includes observations, interviews, documents, past records, audiovisual material, and so forth. So you sit in there, you spend time. That's qualitative. You spend time studying that case in particular. It could be anything. It could be the Titanic. It could be the start of the war between Russia and Ukraine. That's a case study. So you're following everything about it because you want to understand it more in depth. In many case studies, the researcher spends an extended period of time on site and regularly interacts with the person or people being studied. So you are there, you are part of the community or the population that you are studying, and the researcher records details about the context surrounding the case or cases of focus. That includes information about the physical environment and any historical, economic, or social factors that are prevalent there. Ethnographical research, for those of you who are doing anthropology, this will be appropriate because it's a report on social life that focuses on detailed, accurate description rather than explanation. So here you are just giving us a detailed, accurate description of the phenomenon that you are looking into without explanation. So we go into details about the fact that it's an anthropology, developed from anthropology, but you sometimes see those who are doing ethno research immerse themselves into the villages, the communities, and the environment that they become part of it, and really studying it is also education, health, and social policy. So ethnography is a long-term investigation of a group, optimally participate in that group. So you go and sit and time with the community so that you learn about what they eat, how they eat, where they live, and approach multiple methodology of a group or culture. So the issue for the observer is how the particulars in a given situation are interrelated. So you live amongst the population so you can understand how they do things. Grounded theory research, we've spoken about this at the beginning, that grounded theory is a type of qualitative research aimed at deriving theory through the use of multiple stages of data collection and interpretation. So the most highly evolved and explicitly codified method for developing position from qualitative data are called the discovery of the grounded theory. So as you do your research and you're getting data, you are able to develop theory on the basis of the data that you are collecting. Of course, using multiple stages of data collection and interpretation. That is the reason why when you do research, it's always preferable that you look at different data collection techniques and also multiple sources so that you're able to triangulate the kind of information that or the type of data that you are getting from sources. So it's desirable that you don't just use one source, but you use different sources, including literature review. So the grounded theory research method goes beyond describing an event to conceptualizing it. So in some grounded theory, we get to hear what researchers are conceptualizing events for future. So it is an inductive technique that emerge from the discipline of sociology. Remember, we were talking about deductive and inductive, that it also moves from the specific to the general. So in actual fact, it is more inductive in nature. The term grounded means that the theory that developed from the research has its roots in the data from which it was derived. So what do you do with grounded theory? You use the data at your disposal to develop any kind of theory. So you are guided by data to develop the theory going forward. So as a researcher, you will spend many hours observing the behavior of first-year students, for example. You just want to understand their patterns, the way they interact with each other, you know, why is there such a high failure rate amongst first-year students? So you also immerse yourself with that kind of information. Then immense steps for grounded theory. So now you have a very good understanding of the problem. Then you start engaging students so that you discover the theory point of view from a student perspective. So you allow them to give you data, which data will then dictate for you where you want to go with that information in the bigger scheme of things. Historical research, ladies and gentlemen, there's nothing wrong with you as a researcher to conduct historical research, which is an effort to reconstruct or interpret historical events through the gathering and interpretation of relevant historical documents and or oral histories. There are people who go back and want to know what was happening at a particular time, and when they do that, they reconstruct or they interpret historical events, because in every life situation there are events that have taken place historically. Some people will then go and gather and interpret that information to assist us, to understand what was happening at any given stages. Observation study. This is a type of quantitative research in which a particular aspect of behavior is observed systematically. Remember, a systematic observation is a scientific principle, and with as much objectivity as possible. So when you do an observation study, really you are conducting a quantitative research where you're focusing on a particular behavior and you are observing that behavior systematically. So many qualitative researchers rely heavily on personal observation, typically of people or animals, species. For example, there are people who spend huge amount of time and money to go and observe gorillas and so forth. So they want to see how they behave, what they eat, and so forth and so forth. Otherwise, if there were no observation study type of qualitative and quantitative researchers, we would not know what we know about the animal kingdom. So in quantitative research, an observation study is quite different though. For one thing, an observation study in quantitative research might be conducted with plants rather than animals, or it might involve non-living rock formation, soil samples, or dynamic physical phenomena. The important thing about research, ladies and gentlemen, which is what we are doing, is you literally can study anything. You can really study anything. If you think what you are studying now is irrelevant, please, rethink, because there is so much to be studied in this world that other people just choose to study plants. Other people choose to study animals. Like I said, if you look at the observations, people go and spend months and months on gorillas just to understand their way of living and everything else, and what upsets them, and so forth and so on. And a quasi-experimental and ex post facto. We did speak about ex post facto hypothesis the last time, that this is a hypothesis that you formulate after you have collected data. Now, there's also an ex post facto research design, an approach in which one looks at conditions that have already occurred and then collect data to investigate the possible relationship between this condition and subsequent characteristics of behavior. So in true experimental research, a number of possible design can be divided into 5 general categories. Speaking about pre-experimental design, true experimental design, quasi-experimental design, and post-facto experimental design. In true experimental design, and this is now where, I think it was you, Ritumes, where you wanted to know the true experimental design, as opposed to the quasi-experimental design. Here, as a researcher, you manipulate the independent variable, and you examine its effects on another, on a dependent variable. So you deliberately manipulate the independent variable. So if you put, say for example, you want to test temperature, and you just increase it a little bit, and you observe what happens when you increase the temperature, you are manipulating the independent variable. And then when you decrease it, you also observe what happens when you decrease it. You are manipulating the independent variable. But in doing so, you are checking the independent variable insofar as it affects or influence or affect the dependent variable. Because all what you want to establish is that in a true experimental design, you want to establish internal validity, the extent to which the temperature that you are controlling has got any impact on the dependent variable. I'm going to leave the phenomenological research because I do remember that when we started, we defined phenomenology. Maybe we can just quickly go through that again. That phenomenology aims to capture the lived experience of study participants. So you talk to people about where we're in, talk about them and take their experiences, record their experiences, almost like the historical situation. But here, you really just want to capture their lived experiences. The experiences may be gathered through interviewing them and hearing their story. So phenomenology can be used to study lived experiences through literature, poetry, biographies, and art. There are people who are saying we want to study the literature or the biographies of other people or just legislation and so on of other countries. So they're just using phenomenology there, the lived experiences of other people. So the world is shaped by self, and also people talk to you about their lived experience. That's their lived experience. You can't argue with that. And remember, as they share with you, they become your primary source of information. And when we deal with sources of information, primary and secondary and tertiary, I think it will be more hopefully clearer for you about what phenomenology is. But for me, it's important for you to know that when you talk about phenomenology, really, we're talking about an approach that aims to capture the lived experiences of the study participants. And we all have lived experiences. If you go to people that have lived through, say, for example, apartheid, and you ask them questions, you listen to their story, their oral stories, they will probably tell, from a primary source point of view, you might be conducting a phenomenological research study because they tell you from where they were, how they lived, and all that. And I think we do that all the time, storytelling and all that. Surveys, research is a study designed to determine the incidence, the frequency, and the distribution of certain characteristics in a population. Especially is very common in business, government research. There's always a number of surveys which they will tell you very soon when you go to elections. They always conduct surveys which are meant to establish the incidence, the frequency, and the distribution of certain characteristics as to how you are going to vote or how you're not going to vote and so forth, or the business, which products are more popular and which ones are less popular. So surveys are very important in business or also in government. Survey research involves acquiring info about one or more groups of people, perhaps about their opinions, their attitudes, or their experiences by asking them questions and tabulating their answers. So what you do with a survey, you go to people, you ask them questions, whether or not they're willing to pay for petrol at the price that they are paying, and people then give you their views. So immediately what you do, you've got their opinions, you've got their views, you've got their attitudes and their experiences, and you publish them in a survey. So a survey design provides a quantitative description of trends, attitudes, and opinion of a population, or test for associations among variables of a population. So you've been surveyed a number of times that people will ask you, say yes or no, and it's a handheld gadget. You press a no, and that's it. It gets reported on the other side. And it's also been done largely now by those that want to rate their services. They would say, look, we have served you. Do you mind to rate our services? It's a survey. They quickly conduct a survey to check the customer satisfaction. So they could be in a survey, you could look at 3 types of questions. Descriptive questions. What percentage of practicing nurses support, for example, provision of hospital abortion? Questions about the relationship between variables. Is there a positive association between endorsement and support for implementing hospice, for example? Or questions about predictive relationship between variable over time. If we do this, we change this laws, are you more likely to attend or to pay for the services that we are providing for you? So those are just some of the examples that we can think about that are taken directly from sources insofar as this is concerned.
Prof, I just wanted to I wanted to know that if you, while you're doing your portfolio, would you then specifically stick to one form of research, or I know we've spoken about cross-sectional research, but would you then just, I guess, is it necessary for you just to stay in one lane, or are you able to sort of use the different forms of research that's available?
Ideally, it will be great to stay in one lane, because then you are focused, and you must choose something that you're comfortable with. It's more easier that way. But then you also have to understand the differences with the other methods, as it is with the sampling. You have to understand the different types, even if you know you're going to use one particular type that you're comfortable with. So, for instance, you may choose a field experiment, which is in a qualitative study, but maybe you may want to have a quantitative if it's a mixed method, and you pick something else, in there. So, yes, I would say yes, staying in one lane is more important, and something that you feel, because as you do literature, you're going to find that perhaps you're more comfortable or you understand a particular design better. And if you do, it's always advisable that you sit on that and you build your knowledge around it, because otherwise, if you're all over, longitudinal, it's very beautiful, but you and I know that sometimes it takes a while to study people over years, over months.
Yes.
So you may not necessarily use it at the moment. Understood. Because perhaps it is more costly for you. So you look at those things and say, yeah, well, I do understand it. Cross-sectional, very beautiful, but maybe you are not going to be in a position to study, different mixture of people and so. So basically, this is an opportunity where you look at yourself and say, what am I comfortable with? And what is it that I'm able to work with and strengthen in my research study?
That clarifies it for me. Thank you very much, Prof.
Ritumetse, go ahead.
Thank you, Prof. I wanted to ask if it's practical, say, to conduct a phenomenological research as action research. I don't know if I make sense, but here is where I'm coming from, just to provide context. We all know that I think research is moving also to lived experiences. In particular, we're talking about the indigenous knowledge system. Yeah. So now you want to, with action research, you want to solve a problem. Now we are living in times where there's just a myriad of social ills, so to say. So now where one reaches a point where one says, okay, we've been hearing or we've been saying that this is how we go about solving problems. And also, I'm just gonna touch on that the change framework, where in terms of solution, problem and solution resolution. And where it just says that finding the solution or finding answers, it involves a very simple method. And instead of those intricate ways of trying to find an answer, of which we can say it's like scientific answers, which is research. Now, can one modify the research so much that you want to find from people, from their lived experience, and you're hoping that from there you can find an answer to the problem? So now you're conducting a research, but in this research, you don't want to hypothesize. Hypothesize or hypothesize that this is what can be the solution. You want to find the solution from the lived experience of people. But at the same time, you have to answer the question, and you have to have a question and answer it systematically. So I'm just trying to understand if it is practical to actually try and do that, where you answer a question and you answer systematically, but it has to be an answer that you derive from the lived experiences of the people that you are actually inquiring from.
Okay, you know, Ritumet, you've really thrown the pigeons, as they say. When you do action research, remember we said action looking, there's a particular problem that you are concerned about and you want to find solution to in order to improve the situation there and there. That's what action research is all about. So basically, there's a leaking bucket problem. You've identified it, that people perhaps come late at work and so forth. And now you want to stem out late coming as an example, and you come up with strategies and solution to that. After that, you act, then you look at introducing those strategies and you observe how the strategies have improved after a while. Whilst on the other side, and I'm not suggesting you cannot mix the methods, because I think you must have listened to what Sam was trying to caution, that it may be very tempting to do everything at a go, but it's also practical to look at what you can do. Now, when you look at phenomenology, because there's a little bit of historical research in it, not necessarily, that the lines sometimes are quite complex. But with phenomenology, you look at the lived experiences. Remember now, here, lived experiences are more like people or participants that have that are your primary source of information. So it's almost like post facto. It has happened. So you are talking to them to give you their own experiences, which you could bring into action research to say, perhaps a problem similar to this was as once happened, and the lived experience might just guide you on how they've dealt with it. But I'm saying the ability to use both, research designs, it's something that you need to be extremely very careful about, because the lived experience might actually shape the action research for you. Because maybe the problem is similar, but maybe circumstances are different. So yes, I'm sure you can look at phenomenology and action research and at play. But remember, if you are going to do both, you might actually pick one and work around it, because then it's easier, although you may outline elements of the other as you go ahead. I suppose what I'm trying to say is it's a discussion that we can post for engagement more in terms of whether you can use. It's not a mixed methods situation that we are talking about here. It's where you're choosing phenomenological research and action research. You're doing both, right? So your point is, yes, you can talk to lived experiences in order to build future solutions to the problem that you will be confronted with at any given stage. So I'm wary not to give you a yeah or a no answer, because I think it's a matter that we should consider for engagement properly. So mixed, and I'm saying when we do mixed methods, perhaps that's where we go into to have that kind of a debate where we throw both quantitative and qualitative phenomenology experiment, quasi all together, and see how does it in real life or in real research situation work. There are plenty of examples that cover your question, Ritumates. Maybe what we should rather do is that let's prepare for an engagement on whether you can use all these methods together, and when you do, what should then be the way to do it. Will that, at least for now, suffice, Ritumates?
Yes, it will.
As an assignment that we look at. You're saying I want to use both phenomenological and action research to solve a problem. Let's see if you can mix and match them, and how do we do it? Because I think that's the essence of your question. What I'm not going to do now, because I think it's going to be unfair on all of us. I think what we should do, we're going to put on hold the qualitative and quantitative and mixed methods designs, so that when we discuss qualitative and quantitative, we also then discuss mixed methods. But not only that, but we look at whether or not that question that you're asking shouldn't be part of this information. But I'm not worried about the qualitative and quantitative research design, because I think everybody was already talking about it, and for me it will make it easy when we look at it more in context. Now, just to conclude this part, and again, I'm saying we are going to have a focused engagement on the qualitative and quantitative and mixed methods approaches in details, including the kind of techniques that are applicable to qualitative and quantitative. But just in a nutshell here, I thought this table might just be helpful. It's not exhaustive, but at least it can assist. If you look on the quantitative research, there are elements that I thought you need to take note of. It's about measurement, where you quantify, and about relations. So there's an issue of measurement in quantitative. When we're talking about those measurements, validity, reliability, and replicability or reproducibility, you already thinking quantitative. Causality, it's more important in the quantitative research. Generalization. So the reason why we were speaking about them all the time is that so that you now start to see, if your interest is generalization, you are in the quantitative arena. Replication, the ability to do the same study and get same results reproduced by different circumstances, it's a quantitative principle. Doesn't mean that it's less important or more important. It's just for you to be able to know where does it belong. Whilst on the other side, when you're thinking qualitative research, it's mainly seeing through the eyes of the people being studied, or the participant, or the understudy. So you are guided by those that you are studying. You've got no influence on what and how they think, or what they want to say. Description and emphasis on context always going to be important that you understand the context under which certain things are done and said, and the description. So when you go and you study an animal over time, all you are going to do is to describe without explaining anything. Its emphasis on process and flexibility and limited on structure. So it's more flexible than and not rigid. So these are the characteristics, if you like, of the two different approaches or methodologies that you can talk about, qualitative and quantitative. So what we'll do next time when we meet is to really bring all of them, bring them in mixed methods, and you see where you fall in terms of your own research. And I know most of you have already pronounced that you are doing quantitative or qualitative. So when we meet, this is what our focus areas are going to be on. Now, let me take this opportunity again. We try to rush through this overloaded program, but I hope that you are now going to go back and read for yourself which design have you adopted for your own study, research design, and taking note of all those. You then say, is it a case study? Is it experimental? Is it field work? Is it, obviously, I don't expect any one of you to have a longitudinal study. I might be perhaps overly disrespectful to some of you, but I think it will be a challenge for anyone to take, cross-sectional and longitudinal. I don't know. I pause here